thank the Foundation for inviting us. We are honored to take part in this session. I hope that you all will appreciate what is going to be said in the course of the deliberation this morning. You see, it's a very difficult role we are all playing. If I go back to the time when I was at the United Nations, I kind of felt envy towards my colleagues, other Undersecretary Generals in charge of FAO, providing food, or UNESCO, providing education, ILO, providing jobs, development, World Bank, and so forth. In my incarnation at the United Nations, I was the Undersecretary in charge of drugs and crime and terrorism and human trafficking, money laundering. My colleagues were providing public goods, and I was talking about public beds. And I was nicknamed as the Undersecretary for Sinister Affairs, indeed. This morning, something similar is happening. Yesterday, we heard about the cardinal virtues. The texts were the gospel, the encyclicals, and some of the letters by popes, talking about jobs and ethics and development, integrity, solidarity, all of that. Today, you may have read Raymond's brilliant statement and the statement by the other members of the panelists. Well, these writings are really based on John's book of Revelations, otherwise called the Apocalypse. We are talking about the deadly sins, not the cardinal virtues. We are talking about public beds, which are a very prosperous economic activity. I felt great sympathy this morning when we just heard René's brilliant statement, and I admire his honesty and his candor, when he reminded us that after the disaster of 2008, after the crisis, many measures were undertaken to fight money laundering through FATF. I am one of the founding fathers of the Financial Action Task Force. Through a new supervisory measure, the Financial Stability Forum, the Financial Stability Board, and more transparency at the OECD and so forth. Great work, René, you and your peers in the international institutions. But I think Raymond will provide a different picture of the world today, because there is a lot of work yet to be done to improve the system and render it resilient to the attacks which you have seen in 2008. We have to admit that crimes has reached macroeconomic dimensions. In size, difficult to measure. Raymond will offer a view about that. It has a GDP largest than many countries. Actually, statistically, just the crime of drug trafficking, we measured, when I was at the UN, we measured it at around $300 billion a year. That would make it the 20th largest economy in the world, right after Sweden. It would actually qualify organized crime to be part of the G20. Not only crime has reached a macroeconomic dimension, it has penetrated armies, it has conquered parliaments, it has caused humanitarian tragedies. We will hear from Ernie and Marco about the tragedy of either human trafficking, exploitation, or in particular, migration. They are caused not only by, but to a large extent, by corruption, crime, exploitation, and whatever else goes on that indeed forces people to move from one country to another, or from one continent to another. The session will consist of two interlocked topics. First, of course, the big picture of crime, and then the question of human trafficking. I give the floor to Raymond, that will concentrate on the ways criminal proceeds are produced and then laundered throughout the world. Raymond, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in the 2017 conference of the Foundation. I'm particularly grateful to Lord Daniel Brennan. This morning we're going to focus on human trafficking and other forms of economic crime, as Lord Skidelsky will focus our attention this afternoon on incentivizing solidarity and civic virtue. In my organization, Global Financial Integrity, we estimate human trafficking generates about $150 billion a year in profits. The Asia-Pacific region and the EU countries around $50 billion each. 14 million souls, in our estimation, are trafficked for purposes of forced labor. About 4.5 million are trafficked for the sex trade. It could be that there are some 50 million people around the world who have been trafficked and are currently being exploited for labor or sex. Human smuggling and transnational crime are motivated by a desire on the part of the participants in this to earn and shelter profits in a hidden manner. These activities need to be understood within the context of the system that facilitates the movement of this money, the system that facilitates the survival of these activities. Let me introduce this part of my remarks with a story. I got off the airplane in 1961 in Lagos, Nigeria, to take over the management of a company. And one of the early individuals that I encountered was the managing director of John Holt Trading Company, a British trading organization that had been active up and down the west coast of Africa since the late 1800s. And I asked this gentleman, how do you do business in Africa? And he sort of looked me up one side and down the other and wasn't very forthcoming. I got the distinct impression that he didn't like Americans showing up in his ex-British colony so soon after independence. But I pressed on, as is my American manner, and I asked him, well, okay, tell me, how do you price your imported cars and building materials and textiles to sell in the Nigerian market? And he looked at me again and he said, price? Price is not a problem. I'm not trying to make a profit. Now, I had just finished Harvard Business School, spending 2 years learning all about how to make a profit. And here one of the early individuals I encounter says he's not trying to make a profit. What could be going on here? This was my first exposure to the idea that there was something obscure in the capitalist system that I needed to understand. Indeed, the capitalist system has undergone over the last half-century a largely unrecognized but utterly fundamental change. Prior to this, from the late 1800s to the mid-20th century, from the late 18th century to the mid-20th century, capitalists were almost exclusively focused on earning profits. Since about the 1960s going forward, capitalists have become equally or almost equally obsessed with hiding profits. The democratic capitalist system as a whole is affected by this new and disturbing motivation within its capitalism component. These two, democracy and capitalism, should be working in sync to spread prosperity and freedom. But instead, they are becoming decoupled, no longer operating in strength, in sync with each other. To facilitate this new goal, secrecy, a shadow financial system has been created and expanded for the purpose of sheltering trillions of dollars of money that is of unknown provenance and generated by unknown owners. Corporations, banks, individuals make very liberal use of this shadow financial system to secrete money of suspect origin, exactly the same system that is used by human traffickers and other criminals and corrupt government officials and terrorist financiers. The original tenets of democracy, the popular vote, the rule of law, representative legislatures, protection of minority rights. These original tenets of democracy have not fundamentally changed since they were formulated in the late 1700s. The original tenets of capitalism, that is, making profit, spreading wealth, operating ethically, if we are subscribers to Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments, these original tenets of capitalism have been rather radically altered. This alteration, this second motivation within capitalism is contributing to transnational crime, to income and wealth inequality, to political instability, and is contributing to undermining democracy around the world. A rebalancing of capitalism and democracy is, along with climate change, the most urgent and the most challenging task that we face. With the world's population moving toward 11 billion people by the end of this century, 11 billion people likely to be divided, severely divided in income, wealth, opportunity, and security, the capitalist system as we are currently practicing it, it cannot be sustained. This system has to change or it will be ripped aside. Now let me flesh out three aspects of this rather sweeping thesis and link these realities with the crime of human smuggling and other forms of economic crime. First of all, let me talk a little bit about the shadow financial system. Second, the money that this system moves and secretes. And third, the impact this reality has on youth unemployment, as we discussed yesterday. Also, the impact on income and wealth inequality, as the Vatican has so eloquently addressed, and more broadly on the democratic capitalist system. First of all, the shadow financial system. The most important point to grasp about this system is that it is a product of our own doing. This is not something that has been done to us by traffickers and drug dealers and corrupt government officials. No, this is something done by us for the purpose of advancing this new motive within capitalism, which is the shifting and hiding of income and wealth. Understanding the elements of the shadow financial system, this in-between existence, as Archbishop Tomasi calls it, helps us grasp the impact that this system has on crime. Tax havens. These are places to which you can transfer money and pay little or no taxes. When I started in business in the early 1960s, there were, unbeknownst to me at the time, only 3 or 4 tax havens around the world. There are now, according to which list you read, some 70 to 100 tax havens around the world, with more being created. Disguised corporations. These are entities that shield the identity of the owners. And these disguised corporations now number in the millions around the world, more of them in the United States than in any other country. And these disguised corporations are handling thousands upon thousands of transactions every day. Anonymous trust accounts are part of this structure. They provide the same advantages as disguised corporations. Fake foundations are part of this structure. You can create a charitable foundation, you can donate money to your charitable foundation, and you can designate yourself as the beneficiary of the charity of your foundation, escaping taxes at every step along the way. Money laundering techniques. Are these used only by human traffickers and other criminals? No, exactly the same money laundering techniques are used by corporations and individuals. Years ago, I called on a senior Interpol officer in Lyon, France, to discuss with him what he was observing in money laundering activities by criminals and corrupt government officials around the world. He spent 2.5 hours describing to me all sorts of different techniques for moving criminal money and corrupt money. And when he finished, he sort of leaned back in his chair and asked me dismissively if I had anything to add. I said to him, anything to add? You have not cited a single example of moving corrupt and criminal money that I haven't seen years ago in the business of moving commercial dirty money. He bolted forward in his chair, realizing for the first time that everything he had worked on for years had its antecedents in the normal processes of moving commercial dirty money. Trade misinvoicing is another element of the shadow financial system. This is used by multinational corporations and smaller businesses to misinvoice imports and exports, moving, tax evading, and tax avoiding money around the world. This has become entirely normalized in international business. And then finally, there are holes left in the laws of our Western countries to facilitate the movement of money through this shadow financial system and ultimately into our economies. I'm sure some of you saw the film done by Global Witness, where an individual disguised himself as an agent for a foreign unidentified person who wanted to take his money and invest in a lot of real estate and buy a jet and a yacht. This individual, acting in disguise, called on 13 New York bankers with a hidden camera. 12 of the 13 New York bankers agreed to progress the discussion for handling this money, which was quite obviously ill-gotten. 12 of 13 lawyers said, yes, let's go ahead and consider the ways in which we can do this, hopefully without too overtly breaking the law, but certainly skirting the law. This is a shadow financial system that we have created. This is not the work of human traffickers and drug dealers and other criminals. No, it's entirely of our own doing. We created this system to shift hidden revenues and profits across borders and to hide these hidden revenues and profits in disguised accounts. We created the system that serves this new motivation of capitalism, the secreting and hiding of money that we have generated. Second point I want to talk about is how much money is generated and moved by the shadow financial system. I spent a lifetime involved in the developing world. I lived 15 years in Nigeria building a group of companies, and then retaining my interest in Nigeria, moved back to the States and got involved in business activities all over the rest of the developing world for another 20 years. I knew that what I was seeing, the reality that I was seeing around the world, is not what was being addressed by development economists and by policymakers. So after 35 years in the private sector, I segued into the think tank community of the Brookings Institution, wrote a book on dirty money, and formed Global Financial Integrity to address these issues. In GFI, we estimate that $1 trillion a year moves illicitly out of poor countries, primarily into richer countries. This is based on data filed by governments with the International Monetary Fund. And furthermore, we know that this estimate is conservative because of the many aspects of illicit money that do not show up in statistics. We know that our figure is conservative. Think of this, $1 trillion a year moving from poor countries to rich countries, $1 trillion that we can reasonably measure and have confidence that that's a conservative figure. This is more than the total of official development assistance and foreign direct investment that goes into developing countries. We in the West like to believe that we are generously supporting the poor in other lands. In fact, it is the poor in other lands who are supporting us. This $1 trillion a year that flows from poor countries to richer countries has contributed to a startling rise in M2. M2 is the economist's measure of liquid assets: cash, checking accounts, savings accounts, certificates of deposits, government treasury bills, and so forth. M2 is now at $80 trillion. Virtually the whole of this $80 trillion in liquid assets is earning less than the rate of inflation. In other words, it is losing value. We've accumulated through this $80 trillion idle wealth beyond our capacity to utilize productively. This helps us understand in part why 1% of the world, the top 1% of the world in income, owns more than the remaining 99% of the world. We discussed youth unemployment and underemployment yesterday. M2, the measure of liquid assets, and youth unemployment are growing virtually in lockstep. 28 OECD countries exhibit youth unemployment averaging about 30%. In most developing countries, youth unemployment and underemployment is comparable. Nigeria, which I know particularly well, estimates a 28% level of youth unemployment. Nigeria also, of course, is a source country for human trafficking and is impacted by the terrorist group Boko Haram. Human trafficking may be the most scurrilous of transnational crimes, yet this outrage and every other aspect of cross-border crime is growing. Arms trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, organ trade, illegal cultural property, counterfeiting and pirated goods, illegal wildlife trade, fishing, logging, mining, oil theft, and more. We've recently analyzed all of those in a report that we have produced, Transnational Crime and the Developing Countries. Many criminal groups are involved in more than one of these activities at a time because they can use the same channels and the same mechanisms and the same supply chains to undertake their crimes. The reason I dwell on the shadow financial system and the trillions of dollars that it moves and accumulates is to make clear that every aspect of transnational crime utilizes exactly the same shadow financial system that we use to shift and shelter much of our money. We created the system that now facilitates the movement of revenues and the safe deposits of wealth arising from our activities, the same system that is used by the criminals. How many people who work in the shadow financial system and their work contributes, how many people ask if their work contributes to crime or corruption or poverty of others? As Alfredo Pastor has said in other writings, too often the notion of what is ethical disappears amidst the constant pursuit of loopholes in laws and regulations. How many people ask the basic question posed in Genesis 4:9, am I my brother's keeper? The lawyer who sets up disguised corporations and trust accounts that are integral to the shadow financial system, does he ask, am I my brother's keeper? the accountant who muddles entries to disguise sources and uses funds? Does she ask, am I my brother's keeper? The banker that overlooks whether money is coming from an illegal or a suspect source in order that that money can be deposited into his or her institution. Does he or she ask, am I my brother's keeper? The government official who legislates or maintains holes in the laws that facilitate the movement of money through the shadow financial system and into our economies. Does that individual ask, am I my brother's keeper? The capitalist system is operating increasingly outside the proper rule of law. In so doing, it is contributing to accelerating crime, contributing to human smuggling, contributing to other forms of activity that are harmful to our world, activities that undermine democracy. The primary threat to peace and stability moving forward is not coming from the human trafficker, the drug dealer, the corrupt government official, or the terrorist. The primary threat to peace and stability moving forward is coming from us, from our failure to operate the capitalist system in a legal, ethical, and moral manner. His Holiness Pope Francis, in the encyclical letter on care for our common home, closes with a prayer that uses the word indifference. Enlighten those who possess power and money, that they may avoid the sin of indifference, that they may love the common good and advance the weak, and care for this world in which we live. The poor and the earth are crying out. Thank you.
I thank Raymond for his wonderful introductory statement. His definition, the 3 points he made, the definition of shadow economy, the measurement of it, and the consequences of this enormously sized illegal economy will be part of not only our deliberation this morning, but in the course of throughout the meeting and beyond. I failed, not a very good chairman I am, I failed to introduce Raymond. I don't think it needs any further introduction after what he said, but just to remind all of us that he has been a very successful author. He has been a very successful speaker in all sorts of events and sessions and interviews, and of course, a very successful advisor in different policy and bodies. Now, we have, as I said earlier, 2 interlocked topics this morning on our agenda. Crime as an overarching issue, and then within it, a subset, a very tragic humanitarian situation, human trafficking. So I give the floor now to the other expert on crime as such, namely Max Peter Russell. He's not only a friend, but also, and in particular, he was a former director of Europol, so he has an impeccable pedigree as a crime expert and a crime activist, anti-crime activist in terms of leading one of the best-known international institutions, Europol, in taking concrete measures against it. Max Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure for me to be here today and to report to you from my specific perception and specific practical experience as a former police officer. I'm not a scientist, as many of you. I'm not a businessman, as many of you. I'm not working in the banking sector. I've always seen the professional side from the crime-fighting perspective. And therefore, I may wonder, or I wonder if I may surprise you with some of my views, but this should contribute to a debate afterwards. Let me first start by looking at the major aspects of organized crime. if you look across the definitions of organized crime in the world, you find three elements. One element is the so-called organizational element. So we speak about organized crime if at least three people are cooperating together. Their cooperation is based on a division of labor. They cooperate on a continuum basis, and they're linked together by any kind of internal togetherness. The second group is the so-called enabling factor group. Whilst committing crimes, they apply so-called enabling factors. Under alia, they use business structures, they demonstrate power or threatening, and they execute any kind of influence to public authorities like corruption or lobbyism. And finally, they follow the ultimate goal to obtain money or assets, to establish power, or to achieve esteem. And if you remember what has been said by Raymond earlier, the only distinction between organized crime and business is one group of people is committing crimes to achieve these goals, the other group of people is doing this on a lawful way. So to understand organized crime is rather simple. You have to understand business. And then you replace fulfilling your daily work in crimes means you are part of the organized crime business and organized crime groups. And that makes it that complicated, as we have seen over the years that organized crime is very, very deeply interwoven with standard and legal business. And even many business people are not aware of that. And I'm sure 90 or even 100% of all people here in that room are involved in organized crime, but you don't know it. You don't recognize it. You may be even a perpetrator without knowing, but for sure you are victims. Each single price you pay in a shop is influenced by organized crime. Each rate you pay against your insurance is influenced by organized crime, but you don't notice that, as you have not the feeling, you have not the knowledge about this. Let me then, in a second step, look at the phenomenology of organized crime. If you read books on organized crime, it's mystified, but it's not a chimera at all. Organized crime is a very practical thing. It doesn't happen globally, it happens locally. What we see more and more are global interdependencies, but organized crime happens every day, locally, very close to you and us, but we don't even notice that. Organized crime is very concrete and it influences our daily life, and we should be aware about that. And as it was said by Professor Pastor yesterday, each of us should be aware about this threat. We should dispute about this, we should resist, and we should counteract. When I say we, it's not law enforcement only, it's the society, what I mean. And Raymond said in his final words, and I quote him, "The primary threat to peace and stability is coming from us, from our weakening of legal, ethical, moral practices in global economy affairs." And this is a true statement. And I wonder if this statement is also true for ecclesiastical institutions. I have no proof for that, but I raise the question. And when we consider the last contribution by Mr. Bühlhardt, he mentioned some points which made me a little bit interested. As obviously also in the Vatican, the question is now raised and is exemplified by the establishment of the FIU, and I wish him all success to be successful finally. If you are businessmen, if you are investors, the question comes up, where do you invest your money? Do you know your favorite company where you're investing in? Do you know your customer prior to working with his money or for your customer? Do you really do due diligence before starting business cooperation? I just wonder if this is clear to everybody. Let me just raise 3 case examples. Some time ago, there were leaking of information from Swiss banks, not only to Germany, but mainly to Germany. And out of a sudden, it became true that many German people invested black money in Switzerland. Just last year, the leaking of the Panama Papers made very clear that across the globe, many politically exposed persons invested dirty money, black money, in Panama. And just this week, even after I've drafted my speech for today, it became open sources public that in southern Italy, in Campania, the 'Ndrangheta cooperated with ecclesiastical organizations to earn money from the government or from EU institutions. This shows that organized crime is happening every day and that also your institutions may be involved in that. Raymond also called about the damage and the benefits and the harm. I don't need to repeat the figures, but I just want to point out and to stress that it's much more damage, it's more harm than everybody can imagine or that anybody can imagine. The harm is tremendous. The harm is not only on the poor victims of the human trafficking. The harm is also for their relatives, for their families. They are still under torture back home. They are still threatened back home. Ladies and even young people, young men, are raped while they are trafficked. So there's a harm which is far beyond any financial figures you can imagine. And I wonder if this is clear to everybody. We should not focus on the figures, we should focus on the societal harm. And the societal harm has an effect all over the world. And as he also said, this big money is interconnected everywhere. So the big money earned by organized crime is also part of the national GDPs. So it's hidden in the GDPs, and we are even proud if we are able to raise our GDPs. And my question is, how far did we get that we don't even estimate anymore and that we don't even recognize anymore that black money is contributing to the GDP and we don't even complain about that? Obviously, organized crime is no more recognizable. And this is a very, very bad result which I draw to the end of my speech. If organized crime has achieved a point where it cannot be recognized anymore, then organized crime is perfectly committed, and it shows that it's really a threat to the whole society. What are the consequences we should draw from that? As it was said yesterday also by Mr. Pastor, if we keep our lips closed, this is the wrong way. Silence means consent. From my perspective, the only consequence is we must raise our voices, we must resist, and we must also contribute to the banking system, we must contribute to the FIUs, we must contribute to the law enforcement. You as businessmen, you as banking representatives, you have to inform about possible transactions of laundered money, of possible transactions of falsified money, of possible actions where you can see that human traffickers have hired accommodation rooms, have bought food for people, have bought cars to transport illegal migrants. You as businessmen and you as society, you have the options and the possibility to do something. This is my final and rational appeal towards all of us to contribute to the fight against organized crime. Each of us should use his talents. Each of us should use his or her specific opportunities to make a contribution to the long-lasting and comprehensive fight against organized crime, including human trafficking and money laundering at the same time. In a functioning society which is based on human rights, on rule of law, advocating for moral and ethical standards, every citizen needs to do his or her specific part. In special, from my perspective, this does also count for the Catholic Church and all ecclesiastical institutions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We may be all directly or most likely indirectly responsible of crime by what we eat, we consume, we wear, we buy, we produce, or we trade. We move on now from the general overarching theme of organized crime into the specific issue, tragedy, I would say, of human trafficking and exploitation. I give the floor to my friend Ernie Allen. In his bio, which I just glanced at it says he's a global expert on the dark side of internet. Kind of scary, but fear not, he's a wonderful guy. He's the architect and the founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploiting Children and he served as the first chairman of this center for 28 years. Listen to this. During his tenure, more than 180,000 missing children were recovered. Ernie, wonderful.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Antonio. I'm honored to be with you. Raymond noted in his presentation that human trafficking is today a $150 billion a year global industry. He's right. I agree with him. As Antonio indicates, for the past 30 years, I've focused on what I believe are the most hidden, most vulnerable segment of that population, the children. And I can report to you that the trafficking and sexual exploitation of children in the world today is truly a global epidemic. Raymond is right to focus on the shadow economy and the movement of funds from the developing world to the developed world. Yet I think it's important that all of us recognize that human trafficking doesn't just happen somewhere else on the other side of the world. It is happening today in our enlightened, developed Western societies, and we need to come to grips with it. He's also right that there is a shadow financial system, but I want to submit to you today that there's one more factor to consider that is making this problem far greater, far worse than ever before, and that factor is the internet. The internet has revolutionized the way we live, the way we play, the way we learn. The internet has been overwhelmingly positive for society. Yet, as Antonio points out, there is a dark side with challenges unlike anything we've ever seen before. 2 years ago, a man in Sweden was arrested for the rape of a child when he wasn't even in the same country as the child at the time of the assault. Now, how is that possible? What he did was hire men in the Philippines to obtain children as young as 5, and then managed and directed the sexual abuse of those children via webcam, which was disseminated via live streaming video around the world to wealthy Western men watching that activity via the internet. Swedish authorities called it virtual trafficking. There are no scientific incident studies on the true scale of this problem, but there's lots of anecdotal data. Let me cite a couple. As Antonio mentioned, I ran the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for almost 30 years. We established a cyber tip line in which we received tips and leads from around the world regarding the sexual exploitation of children. In my 30 years, in not a single year did we handle as many as 1 million reports. Last year, the center handled 8 million. The other thing that we created in 2002 in response to a bizarre U.S. Supreme Court decision was something called a Child Victim Identification Program. As children are sexually abused and their images are distributed via the internet, what we were trying to do is to place those children somewhere on planet Earth, identify them, rescue them, get them help. The first year we set this up in 2003, we received 50,000 images and videos sent to us from law enforcement, from prosecutors, from others around the world. Last year, the center received 25 million images and videos. This problem has exploded with the advent of the internet, and the world does not yet recognize it. Now, how is this possible? Are that many people really sexually attracted to young children? Prior to the internet, someone with these interests felt isolated, aberrant, alone. Today, with the advent of the internet, they're part of a global community. They can interact with people of like interest around the world, normalizing their interest and their behavior. They share images, fantasies, techniques, even real children, and they do it all anonymously. Again, let me submit to you a horror story. Last year, authorities in Queensland, Australia, shut down a ring in which a child victim had been adopted as a newborn, raised being sexually abused and photographed from birth, the images distributed via an encrypted network worldwide, and the operators of this network even traveled with the little boy so that members of the network could not just look at his picture, they could abuse him themselves. And this was only resolved because one of the operators made a mistake, and law enforcement in Canada was able to penetrate the network, and the Australians arrested these two operators and others and put them in prison. The little boy was 7 years old when this site was shut down. He'd been abused for 7 years. Canadian researcher Dr. Michael Cito estimates that 1% of the male population on a conservative basis is aroused by pedophilic stimuli, and that 3% are not exclusively pedophile, but are pedophile and hebephile, which means an interest in early pubescent children. Now, if you do the math, there are 3.5 billion males on the planet today. 1% is 35 million people. So this is not a problem that is unique to one country or one region or one institution. It is a global phenomenon, and much of it is financial crime. 10 years ago, we were able to identify husband and wife operators of a child pornography site in Texas, worked with law enforcement authorities who arrested the operators of the site, brought them to justice. At the time of their arrest, they had 70,000 customers paying $29.95 a month to access graphic images of small children being raped and sexually assaulted. One of their sites was called Baby Rape. I called the chairman of a major credit card company, and I said to him, "How is this possible?" And he said to me, "We don't know what these accounts are for. If you can identify for us in a timely way where this site is located, who the merchant bank is, this is an illegal use of the payment system. We can stop the payments and shut down the accounts." And so that's what we did. We brought together major banks, credit card companies, internet companies. They donated live accounts. As we would identify these sites, we would alert law enforcement and these companies, and they would stop the payments and shut down the accounts. When we started this coalition, an Asian bank that was a member of our coalition hired a major economic consulting firm that estimated this was conservatively a $20 billion a year industry. 2 years ago, I received an email from the U.S. Treasury's Office of Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes saying that they believed this effort had reduced the size of this industry to effectively zero, less than $1 million a year. We damaged the business model. So the companies wanted to do a press conference and declare victory. And I said, no, I don't think we ought to do that. My concern was we hadn't ended it. We just moved it. And what we have discovered is that we have, in fact, moved it into the emerging virtual economy driven by the internet. Today, companies are using cryptocurrencies, sites like Bitcoin and other vehicles for engaging in transactions, for sending money, a system which is unregulated, unbanked, not overseen by any central bank, and is, for all intents and purposes, anonymous. And there's some other virtual currencies that impact in this that aren't cryptocurrencies. Russia's web money has 31 million users. Africa's M-Pesa, that basically allows people to wire money, all kinds of legitimate purposes, has 26 million users. We looked at this phenomenon and drew 4 basic conclusions. One is it's global. The money moves network to network, not nation to nation. Secondly, that draconian regulation is not the answer, because there are 2 billion people on the planet today who don't have access to the mainstream financial system. These kinds of tools can be used for financial inclusion. that there are existing laws and regulations that ought to be applied in this space, but aren't yet. And finally, that the central challenge is internet anonymity. Today, as Antonio mentioned, there is a dark web, an anonymous internet that is the purview of drug traffickers, weapon traffickers, terrorists, human traffickers. There are assassination sites. A British university did research and found that while only 2% of dark web sites are pedophilia sites, they represent 80% of dark web traffic. So what do we do about that? The anonymous internet exists because the US government, in its infinite wisdom, developed a tool some years ago that allowed people to use the internet anonymously for a high-minded and noble purpose, to protect political dissidents and journalists. But dissidents and journalists are not the only people using these tools. So what do we do about it? I'm a lawyer. I believe fervently in individual privacy. However, I think there's a difference between privacy and anonymity. And I believe that anonymity is a prescription for disaster. We face a huge challenge as a global, as a world today, and that is, how do we protect the true vision of the internet while still limiting it to some extent so that we can eliminate the trafficking and victimization of the world's children? Yesterday, in his comments, Cardinal Parolin said there is a virtue of prudence. And my argument is we can maximize the power of the internet, but still limit its ability to do these kinds of things. Thank you very much.
Again, an impressive statement. An interesting one, if you compare it with what we heard yesterday about ICT, information communication technologies, how they are changing the legitimate business, the legitimate world. Well, Ernie showed us a dramatic revelation, the extent that modern communication allows crime and exploitation to overcome time and space. Okay, we started from a very global issue, we went to the trafficking issue, we go into even a more concrete, more specific statement by Marco Impagliazzo, who is submitting to all of you a proposal, an important proposal. But before giving the floor to him, I remind you all that he's not only a professor at the university, therefore with impeccable scientific credential. He is the president of the community of Sant'Egidio since about 15 years. As you all recall, Sant'Egidio, there's wonderful work around the world, in Europe and in Africa as well. Personally, Marco was involved in the negotiation which brought peace to Algeria after the tragic events in 1994-95. Marco, you have the floor.
Good morning. I'm sorry, I will speak in Italian. We are in Rome. Your Eminence, in Latin. Ringrazio molto il segretario generale della Fondazione Centesimus Annus, Eutimio Tiliakos, per l'invito. Da qualche tempo l'opinione pubblica europea è sistematicamente aggiornata sui numeri degli sbarchi di profughi che avvengono nelle nostre coste. Più raramente o quasi mai si parla di numeri di quella straziante carneficina umana che è divenuto in questi anni l'attraversamento del Mediterraneo dal Medio Oriente o dall'Africa in direzione dell'Europa. Secondo uno studio dell'Università di Amsterdam, tra il 1990 e il 2013 si erano registrati 3.188 decessi in mare, ma nell'agosto del 2015 questo numero era lievitato fino a 8.607. È una conta macabra, molto difficile da stabilire con esattezza. Qualcuno arriva a stimare la morte di oltre 23.000 migranti tra il 2000 e il 2015. nel tentativo di raggiungere l'Europa via mare, il 50% in più di quello che appare dalle stime esistenti. Una strage con un bilancio simile a quello di una guerra per dimensioni e numero di decessi, in media più di 1.600 l'anno. L'8 luglio del 2013, 4 mesi dopo la sua elezione, Papa Francesco si è recato a Lampedusa per il suo primo viaggio pastorale. Lì ha parlato di globalizzazione dell'indifferenza, dicendo: chi ha pianto per la morte di questi fratelli e sorelle? La globalizzazione dell'indifferenza ci ha tolto la capacità di piangere. Le morti in mare, così come quelle che avvengono ogni giorno in Messico per tutti quei migranti che dal Centro America cercano di raggiungere gli Stati Uniti con la famosa Bestia, il treno che attraversa il Messico, rappresentano da tempo nel corpo delle nostre società una ferita aperta. In questo senso, la comunità di Sant'Egidio ha cercato, attraverso l'iniziativa che ora illustrerò, dei corridoi umanitari, di rispondere a questa grave crisi umanitaria generata qui nel Mediterraneo dalla guerra in Siria, ma anche, come è stato detto finora, per rispondere alla liberazione di queste persone dai mercanti di vite umane, dai padroni dei barconi, dai signori della morte che obbligano tanti a questi viaggi incredibili. Questa iniziativa dei corridoi umanitari è nata nel gennaio del 2016 ed è una risposta, seppure limitata, alle tante tragedie che si consumano. Da un certo punto di vista è la possibilità che organizzazioni cristiane della società civile offrono ai rifugiati di non barattare il rischio della vita con l'esigibilità del diritto alla protezione, rendendo illusorio questo stesso diritto. Ma la garanzia di canali di accesso sicuri e regolari dei migranti è anche la proposta fatta agli Stati dell'Unione Europea di un modello per affrancarsi dalla contraddizione di disporre di un quadro giuridico molto avanzato, forse il migliore al mondo, ma al tempo stesso di quasi impossibile applicazione. L'Europa infatti ha in questi anni ampliato lo spettro delle tutele per i richiedenti asilo, allo status di rifugiato previsto dalla Convenzione di Ginevra, che copre in sostanza i casi di persecuzione individuale, si è aggiunta la protezione sussidiaria, poi quella umanitaria, poi quella temporanea. Eppure, sotto la spinta della pressione migratoria di questi anni, i Paesi membri dell'Unione Europea non sono riusciti a applicare queste stesse regole che si sono dati e si sono spesso chiusi nelle loro frontiere, tranne qualche temporanea eccezione, mettendo da parte il principio di solidarietà. Prova ne è il permanere dell'anacronistico regolamento Dublino 3, parlo qui davanti all'arcivescovo, è uscito, e il fallimento del programma di reinsediamento e ricollocazione di migranti tra i diversi Stati. Anche i programmi dell'UNHCR per il resettlement a livello mondiale hanno trovato in Europa recentemente solo porte chiuse. Dalla consapevolezza che i profughi dovrebbero essere in grado di presentare le proprie richieste di protezione già alle istituzioni presenti nei paesi terzi, nasce il progetto dei corridoi umanitari. La sua base giuridica è l'articolo 25 del regolamento visti dell'Unione Europea, che prevede per ciascun Stato membro la possibilità di emettere visti con validità territoriale limitata per motivi umanitari o di interesse nazionale o in virtù di obblighi internazionali. Grazie ad esso, questo articolo mai applicato, è stato siglato un protocollo d'intesa con i Ministeri degli Esteri e dell'Interno del governo italiano prima e del governo francese poi, per consentire l'arrivo in questi paesi, nell'arco di 2 anni, di 1.500 profughi dal Libano, prevalentemente di nazionalità siriana. E questo accordo ormai è quasi completato. Prevede l'ingresso legale sul territorio italiano e francese di persone in condizioni di vulnerabilità, famiglie con bambini, anziani, malati, persone con disabilità, ma anche vittime di persecuzioni, torture e violenze. Queste persone vengono selezionate attraverso missioni operative delle associazioni proponenti in loco, con la collaborazione di attori locali, organismi internazionali, chiese, NGO, e i cui nominativi vengono trasmessi alle autorità consolari italiane e francesi per permettere il controllo di queste persone dai parti dei ministeri dell'Interno. Una volta arrivati in Italia, i profughi sono accolti dai promotori del progetto, che sono comunità cristiane. In Italia la Conferenza Episcopale, la Comunità di Sant'Egidio, le conferenze, la Federazione delle Chiese Evangeliche, e in collaborazione con altri partner, spesso famiglie, privati, sono ospitati in diverse case e strutture di accoglienza. C'è una grande mobilitazione a questo livello e noi dobbiamo registrare in Italia e in Francia un numero maggiore di sponsor rispetto ai visti che ci sono stati concessi. Questo programma porta anche a una integrazione nel tessuto sociale e culturale attraverso l'apprendimento della lingua gratuitamente, la scolarizzazione dei minori e altre iniziative e ovviamente l'assistenza legale per la presentazione della domanda di protezione internazionale. Il modello è quello dell'accoglienza diffusa, personalizzata, secondo un percorso adozionale che coinvolge le comunità locali e la loro attiva partecipazione. Il fondatore della nostra comunità, il professor Andrea Riccardi, ne ha parlato come della risposta della società civile italiana e francese che non vogliono ripiegarsi su se stesse, non vogliono girarsi dall'altra parte, ma intervenire e aiutare. In effetti, sinora, nell'ambito del programma, l'offerta di accoglienza, come ho accennato, supera la domanda. La centralità della società civile nel progetto, perché come sapete, o come nella legge italiana purtroppo non è prevista la sponsorship come in altri paesi, per esempio il Canada, è data anche dal fatto che il finanziamento dell'operazione è totalmente a carico delle organizzazioni proponenti, senza alcun onere finanziario per lo Stato. Organizzazioni che si occupano, come dicevo, della integrazione di queste persone, perché come dice Papa Francesco, sono le comunità che integrano, sono le comunità che integrano. Il primo corridoio umanitario nacque grazie alla partnership della nostra comunità con le federazioni delle chiese evangeliche italiane e a gennaio di quest'anno è stata ufficializzata la partenza di un secondo corridoio umanitario, non più soltanto dall'Etiopia questo, che avrà il suo hotspot in Etiopia e che si interesserà di 500 rifugiati sud-sudanesi, eritrei e somali nell'arco di un anno. In questo caso la titolarità delle operazioni è, oltre a quella della nostra comunità, anche alla Conferenza Episcopale Italiana. Questo modello sta avendo un grande successo, è stata segnalata come best practice nel recente convegno delle Nazioni Unite sulle migrazioni e come dicevo il governo francese ha scelto di percorrere questa strada e assieme ad essa il Vaticano stesso, ricordate che il Papa ha portato a Roma da Lesbo più di 20 rifugiati affidati poi alla nostra comunità, alla Repubblica di San Marino. È un esempio di best practice, è una soluzione all'avanguardia perfettamente replicabile. La speranza è che si ampli e si diffonda presto in tutto il continente. Vi ringrazio.